All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started with this virtual town hall. I appreciate everyone who has joined, and we will record this and play it back for later so people can watch this later recorded. If there are any questions that you have for me, please put them into the live chat and I will answer them, and I'll go through all the questions that we get tonight. I'll start off with just sharing my own thoughts, do an introduction, and then my own thoughts on a couple of different issues, and then we'll move into questions. But feel free to put questions in the live chat at any point. So, hello, my name is Jeff Stenquist. I'm a representative in Utah House of Representatives, representing House District 51, which is Draper, basically. Covers about 90% of the city of Draper. And I was elected 2 years ago after serving for 12 years on the Draper City Council, ran for Utah House of Representatives. And so I've been in for one term. I've done 2 legislative sessions so far, so almost 2 years. I've lived in Draper for almost 25 years and have raised my 4 children here. I've got 2 children that have graduated from Corner Canyon High School, and 2 others that are currently attending Corner Canyon High School, a senior and a freshman. And we love Draper. We love the community. We love the people there, all of our friends and associates that we have in the community, and all of the incredible growth and positive changes that have happened in our city over the last 25 years since we've lived there. We've seen a lot of new commercial come to Draper, everything from the IKEA and the Level Living Planet Aquarium, the hospital, eBay, so many different things that have come to the city. And of course, one of my favorite are all of the trails that we have in Draper. And I love the ability that I have to go out almost every single day and enjoy the trails that we have in our community. It's a wonderful place to live. We have a wonderful quality of life in the city of Draper and also in the state of Utah. So I want to share some of the, kind of recap, which is going to be really hard to recap some of the things that have gone on this year, because it seems like this has been a really long year with a lot of things that have happened. But I want to go back to the last legislative session that was just held in January and February. It was really interesting because we went into that legislative session with high estimates in terms of our revenue projections. The economy was super strong, extremely low unemployment rate. I remember in 2019, the biggest thing that we were worried about was a labor shortage. We didn't have enough workers to fill all of the jobs that we had in the state of Utah. And that was one of our primary concerns. Our income tax revenues were up, and our sales tax revenues were up, although not by as much. And so going into the 2020 legislative session, our revenue projections were up. And so we were able to plan for some the best way to use that money. And so that enabled us to give, do some good raises for state employees, which was overdue, as well as some record investments in public education. And that was one of the things that really was a focus. And I think that with everything that's happened in the last 6 to 9 months since the legislative session, I think that's something that's been forgotten, is that there was in that legislative session a very historic agreement that was made to create a long-term plan for education funding, which part of that included a constitutional amendment that voters will have a chance to vote on this November that will add to the Utah Constitution the ability to take income tax revenues and include with in that the ability to use that money toward services for children and the disabled. And that was, I think, a better attempt than the attempts that we'd had in prior previous to that, where we were trying to balance, last year we were talking a lot about the imbalance between income tax revenue and sales tax revenue, and the fact that income tax revenue was up and down. Of course, the last few years it's been way up, but sales tax revenue has not been keeping up with that income tax. But now, of course, we don't know what's going to happen this year with income tax revenues, and it's going to come down. We were very worried. I remember talking, even though we had no idea that there was a recession coming, but we were talking about how likely it was that there would be a recession, that the strong economy that we were experiencing was not going to last, and we had to plan for a rainy day. So even though there were a lot of people coming to us and saying, spend this extra money, and all the different ideas that they had for spending all the money that we had, instead, I think we took a very responsible approach. We paid down debts, we paid off bonds, we paid cash for some of the construction out at the new Salt Lake City airport and for the new prison that's under construction right now. And I think that was very wise. But we were trying to plan for what are we going to do to prepare ourselves for the next economic recession. And we had no idea that it was going to happen that fast, that really it was literally a couple of months and even a couple of weeks away that we were going to find ourselves in an absolute cliff of a recession in March and April. So what we had attempted to do prior to that in terms of tax reform was not well received, was not as good of a solution that we could have come up with. And really what came out of the ashes of that those tax reform efforts was really sitting down seriously with a lot of different stakeholders and saying, okay, what's the real solution here? And one of the things we talked about, and we heard a lot from the public during that process, was to say, the real issue is that our hands are tied in terms of having earmarked income tax revenue for public and higher education. And that was the biggest thing that was kind of at the root of the issue that we were trying to get at. And we had a lot of people saying, well, let's just fix that. Well, fixing that requires a constitutional amendment, and there were a lot of concerns being expressed by the education community. But after tax reform went through that process and we repealed it in the first week of the legislative session, that's when I think all the stakeholders came together and said, hey, let's just really trying to come up with a practical solution to this. And that's where this plan for constitutional amendment G, I think it's G, on the ballot this year, basically changes the Constitution to include services for children and the disabled. And then in addition to that, if that passes, there's already legislation that's in place that will put in place a framework for long-term stable education funding, so that education will not be upset or will not be impacted by income tax ups and downs. The income tax tends to be very volatile, and it's up one year and down another year. And so in order to smooth out that education revenue curve, there was an agreement that was made that the education community and lawmakers and the legislature and the governor, we were all able to come together and come up with really, I think, a historic plan for long-term education funding. So now it's in the hands of the voters to decide whether or not they're going to ratify that plan, that really the Superintendents Association, the school districts, the PTA, the UEA, all came together and said, yes, this is something that we can all agree on. So, and now it's in the hands of the voters to vote in November whether or not to go forward with that plan. And if the voters reject that, then we'll have to go back to the drawing board again and come up with a different plan and understand how we're going to deal with making sure that we have a balanced budget and balanced revenue streams to pay the bills that we need to in the state of Utah. So I'm actually very interested to see what happens with that constitutional amendment, and I'm excited for the opportunity, for for the opportunity to say, we've basically solved this problem. We don't have to come back again and try to go through some other plan for reforming taxes that I think will have a long-term framework in place. I also want to talk about some of the bills that I ran this year. One that I was very excited about was the ability. Well, actually, before I move on from that, it seems like we have a question, and if it's on that topic, maybe we'll stay on that topic, or if it's not a topic. If we have a question, what's the question that we have?
The question says, 2 years ago, we voted for Medicaid expansion. You altered what we had voted for in the next session. Mm-hmm. How do we know that you won't do that with this legislation?
And I'm assuming by this legislation, it means so I don't know if that means that. So let me address the Medicaid expansion. So Medicaid expansion was, in the state of Utah, a lot of states had basically expanded Medicaid according to what the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare had specified. But Utah was not one of those states, mainly because we were very concerned about the cost. Yes, there was a lot of that cost that was borne by the federal government, but it also passed a lot of costs onto the state governments without a lot of flexibility given to the states on how they wanted to manage those funds. And so basically, the concern was that we were going to have our hands tied in terms of how to implement Medicaid, and we were in negotiations with the Trump administration to get a few waivers on how we wanted to implement our own version of Medicaid that would provide medical services to those that needed it and those that didn't have coverage, but without but also with giving us the budgetary flexibility to make sure that we didn't basically bankrupt our state and run out of money, which had happened in some other states. There were some pretty serious budgetary problems that had happened in other states that had expanded Medicaid, and we were very worried about that. So in short, what the legislation did was that we passed said, okay, if we get a waiver from the Trump administration, then we will. There were basically 4 different versions of the bill. There was like Plan A, B, C, and D. And if Plan A was if we get one waiver, then we will go with that. If we don't get that waiver, then it will default to Plan B. If we don't get that waiver, it'll default to Plan C. And we had very strong indications from the Trump administration that we were going to get those waivers. But in the legislation, it said if we don't get the waivers that we expect from the Trump administration, then we will default to what the voters passed, and that will be the law. And so that was in the law. And as it turned out, the Trump administration, basically because they were trying to push some lawsuits to overturn, and they are still pushing lawsuits through to the Supreme Court to see if they will overturn the Affordable Care Act, which is going to be heard actually right now by the Supreme Court and possibly voted on in the next couple of months. For that reason, the Trump administration did not approve the waivers that we had asked for, and so as the law said, we tried, but since we didn't get those waivers, then it defaulted to what the voters had passed. So now the question being, the legislature passed that law. The voters in a voter initiative can make legislation. That's one way to make a law, is to have the voters pass an initiative. Another way to pass law is to have the legislature pass legislation. But any legislation that's created either by the citizens or by the legislature can be changed in the future by a future legislature or by a future citizen initiative. So it's true that there's nothing that would say that, maybe in the future, maybe 5, 10, 15, who knows how many years from now, the legislature may come back and say, hey, we need to make a change to this law. And I think that that's appropriate, that we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And so there could be changes that could be made in the future by a future legislature.
And he was referring to education funding.
And on the education funding as well, right now there will be, the legislation says that there will be a special fund set aside, and the only thing that fund can be used for is for education funding. And so we currently have a special education rainy day fund. So when we put money into the rainy day funds, they go into different buckets, and we have a specific education rainy day fund. This would create an additional, basically, slush fund for education. The education rainy day funds can only be used basically in certain circumstances. So it's very tightly restricted. Then we would also have another reserve fund for education that would basically help us smooth out the peaks and valleys when we have a downturn in the economy and we need to backfill education funding, so that we make sure that the education community, the charter schools, the school districts know that they have a stable source of revenue going forward, and they're not going to be subject to that volatility. So could that structure be changed? Sure, it could be. But I think that it would be very difficult, and it would be something that would draw a lot of scrutiny if that framework and that structure was changed significantly. I think that would be a very difficult thing to do. Not impossible, but certainly it certainly could be done. Any other questions?
Not of right, not as, yeah.
Okay, well then I'll talk about one of the bills that I passed last year, which was to create create what's called the Outdoor Adventure Commission. This is a bill that legislative leadership actually asked me to run because they recognize that we have, even though we have incredible assets in the state of Utah when it comes to outdoor recreation. In fact, I can't think of a state that is better than us in terms of outdoor recreation. We have probably the best state in the nation for outdoor recreation. At the same time, there's not really a statewide comprehensive plan and long-term strategy for outdoor recreation. A lot of it is done kind of on a regional basis, kind of piecemeal. And so recognizing this, I was asked to kind of head this initiative up, mainly because of the experience that I've had with outdoor recreation and building trails in Draper during my time on the city council, and even now as I continue to serve on the Draper Parks and Trails Committee. And so this is an assignment that I was very excited to take on, and a project that I'm very excited to do. And what it does is it creates what's called the Outdoor Adventure Commission. It has about 15 different members, different stakeholders from different groups, and legislative leaders, as well as people from the Office of Outdoor Recreation, Office of Tourism. And what we're going to do is create gather information on all the different recreation assets that we have in the state of Utah, and then we're going to take that strategy, formulate a plan, and then with the idea that in the future that would help us direct our revenues and our investments to know where we need to invest to improve the outdoor recreation experience, not specifically targeted at people from out of state, but at our own residents. This is not an effort to try and bring more people into the state of Utah. We're already doing a pretty good job of that, but we're saying, for those of us who live here and love to recreate here, as well as people who come from out of state to recreate, how can we make that recreation experience better? Do we need more boat ramps, more hiking trails, more, whatever it might be? Do we have trailheads? Do we have insufficient parking, or do we need more, restroom facilities? Where are we lacking in infrastructure, in personnel, in do we have certain things that are being overused and other things that are being underutilized? and and those are the things that we'll try to identify so that we can really elevate, again, our outdoor recreation experience in the state of Utah. So that's one of the bills that I was able to pass this year, and as a consequence, the commission was formally created. I was named as chairman. From the House side, there'll be a House chair and a Senate chair. So I'm the House chair for it. But we have put that commission actually on hold at the moment because of the budget constraints that we've had because of COVID. So we're gonna, right now that's on hold until, but we expect that to start up next year. And so let me kind of back up, and as I was talking about some of the things that were going on, we really had, I think, some great things happen in the last legislative session. And we started to hear, in January and February about this virus that was happening in China, and we were starting to listen in and hear some of that news, and it started to concern us. And in fact, by the last week of the session, we knew that this was coming, and this was hitting the state of Utah as well as the nation. We did, at that point, we didn't have a single case in the state of Utah. But we knew we needed to prepare for it, and so after spending weeks and weeks and passing a budget, we knew that budget was going to have to be completely redone, which is basically what happened. We've had 6 special sessions this year, and most of them having to do with reworking the budget. After Congress passed the CARES Act, which provided some federal funding to deal with the pandemic, we needed to take that money, take a look at how to best utilize that money, where it was best spent in terms of enhanced testing, or if we needed PPE equipment, loans to small businesses. There was a lot of different aspects to that, as well as basically cutting about $800 million out of the budget we passed. And not knowing what was going to happen, I think this was in May or June that we completely redid the budget for the state of Utah. We really cut it down to a lot of the bare bones. We cut everything out. Even the small amount of money that had been allocated to fund this outdoor commission that I was on got reduced, which was completely reasonable. Now that we see where we're at right now, and that our economy has pretty remarkably started to come back, certainly not to where we were a year ago, but it will be very interesting to see what our revenue projections are as we go into the next legislative session. We're not gonna have the revenues that we saw in 2019, or even that we thought we were going to have in 2020. But I think it's maybe not as dire as what we thought, what we feared it was going to be in the second quarter of this year. So the budget had to be drastically reduced. State employees, working from home, just like a lot of businesses, have had to change their business practices to deal with the pandemic. It's really affected, as everyone knows, our lives in so many different ways. But we were able to react to that, and I'm so grateful for all of the preparation and the fiscal conservatism and the conservative approach that we've taken in the past years that really prepared our state better than any state in the nation to weather a difficult storm like this. As we've seen, our economy is number 1 in the nation right now. We have rebounded from this pandemic economically better than anyone. Now, of course, it is affecting people's health, and it's a very serious disease, and people have lost their lives. And I want to express my condolences to everyone who has lost loved ones or has suffered through very serious illnesses. I've heard from constituents who had a very bad bout of COVID and had to be hospitalized and had a difficult time of it. Others that had contracted it and didn't feel severe symptoms. So we need to recognize that it's something that has hit a lot of people very seriously. And those of us that live in Draper, we're part of Salt Lake County, and we have been under a mask mandate now for many months. I think it's maybe something that we've kind of gotten used to. When I go to the grocery store or when I go to the hardware store, I have to get used to the idea that I'm going to put a mask on, and whenever I go out in public, we don't have the ability to gather in groups the way that we did before, and it's my sincere hope that we can get past this as quickly as possible. One of the biggest impacts I think that we've all felt is what it's done with our children and our education system. With two kids of my own in Corner Canyon High School, and having them be quarantined, as well as having to shift back to online learning. The online learning model, we felt like in the spring, was extremely difficult. It was extremely painful for parents, and it was and most importantly, it was not an effective learning environment for our children. And so I think that the education community has done an admirable job in trying to pivot and adjust to this situation that we find ourselves in right now. I just found out even less than an hour ago that Draper Park Middle School, after being online learning, is shifting back to in-person learning starting Monday. That's good news that their case counts have come back down to a level that the health department and the school district feels like they can do that. And I don't know if Corner Canyon is going to be there anytime soon, but hopefully we can all take the steps that we need to reduce the impact of this, particularly for those who are in vulnerable situations, and making sure we're sensitive to that, because for young people, healthy people, it tends to be very mild, but for many of our vulnerable populations, it can be very serious, and so we have to be very careful about how it's passed to some of those groups. So we have another question.
I'm not so sure if it's a question, but a comment kind of thing. Says, I'm also interested in the question of the bargain that resulted in support of Amendment G by PTA and UEA, etc. I really appreciate your explanation of the legal prerogative of the legislature and the lack of assurance that some future legislature can't change things, especially with the recent pass of Props 2, 3, and 4, where Utah legislators weakened or killed voter initiatives, and recognizing your limited influence over whether the House honors this deal, what do you commit to do as an individual legislature?
Okay, so I absolutely, and I think that in this situation, this constitutional amendment and this educational framework that was put in place was something that the legislature committed to do. And so we absolutely, as a legislature, as a whole, wholeheartedly support and endorse this new framework, and have given our commitment that we will honor it. And I personally will, I would never, I would not support any attempt to renege on that promise. I think it's a great thing, and the only thing that I would support is if everyone came together in a consensus to say, let's make it better, right? I mean, that's not to say, because we may find that it's not perfect, and if the education community comes to us and says, hey, it really needs to be changed and tweaked here and there, that would be fine, as long as everyone was in agreement. But to go back on our word on something like that, never. And I don't think that we would ever have the need to do that, because I think this is a problem that really has been growing for many years. This is a problem that not to criticize legislators in the past, but really this problem has been coming at us for more than 20 years, and really ever since that restriction was put on funding. It's been a growing problem, but the can has been kicked down the road for decades until it really came to a head where we just couldn't sit by and fund all of the things that we need to fund in state government. That includes everything from emergency services to health services. Particularly when we talk about the budget, one of the biggest things that has grown over the years has been our social services. We want to be able to provide services for the poor and the homeless. And now we have an obligation to provide Medicaid, the state portion of Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, and those are things that are going to be expensive, and so we need to be able to have the ability to pay for all of those things. And I think that this framework, and really, I think that this is a benefit to the education community in the sense that really the old model, I don't think wasn't good for anybody, including education. And so I think that the new model will serve everyone well for the foreseeable future. Any other questions?
Not right now.
Okay. Well, let's see. I'll move on to some different topics. We've talked a little bit about, let me talk a little bit about air quality. So that's another issue that I've been very actively involved in. I'm part of the legislative Clean Air Caucus. I've run a couple of bills having to do with air quality. And one of the things that I learned was that of our air, of the pollutants that are contributing to our air quality issues, about 60% of our emissions come from automobiles. But what I found a little bit shocking was that about a large portion of that, maybe at least 40% of those, only comes from a very small portion of cars, and it's the really old polluting cars. These are cars that are older than 2003 and have very, very high levels of emissions from those vehicles. And so taking one of those vehicles off the road could be the equivalent of taking 60 new cars off the road. And so what my legislation does is it basically gives an incentive for people who have an old polluting vehicle. If they get rid of their old vehicle, and I'm not just talking about sell it, but they have to scrap the vehicle so that vehicle can never be driven again, can never contribute to our air quality problems. If they scrap that vehicle, they get a certificate from the salvage that they scrap the vehicle. They can then get a voucher that would go toward the purchase of a new clean vehicle. And the amount of incentive they could get depends on the type of vehicle they get. Their income level is another factor. So if you buy an EV or a hybrid, you get a larger incentive than if you just simply buy a tier 3 vehicle, which a tier 3 fuel vehicle is much more clean than an older car, especially if you're using tier 3 gas. A tier 3 vehicle burning tier 3 gas is extremely clean, not zero emissions, but extremely low emissions. And so that bill that would basically provide a carrot and an incentive. It's modeled after a federal grant that we received. They did a pilot program on it up in Cache Valley, found it to be very successful. And so my bill took that pilot project and expanded it across the the Davis and Salt Lake counties and Weber County, so that that incentive could be used to basically remove, accelerate the pace at which these old polluting vehicles were moved off the road. It's one of the as different air quality bills are evaluated and different ideas are looked at, that bill had a better return on investment in terms of amount of pollutants removed from the air per dollar spent than any other proposal that we had on the list. So for that reason, it was put at the top of the priority list in terms of air quality bills. Now, of course, because of all of the budgetary cutbacks that we've had, there was no money left over, particularly after COVID, for money to go toward, say, air quality initiatives, unfortunately, this year. Of course, COVID itself has been has greatly helped our air quality because it has removed so many vehicles off of the roads because people are working from home so much more and reducing their travel. And if it wasn't for fires in California, we would have had spectacular air quality this year. And I think that we will have spectacular air quality for the next several months. We should have a pretty good year. We actually had some pretty good years the last few years. Mainly, we've had good weather. We haven't had a lot of inversions, and so our air quality has been pretty well. And really, I think that we need to look back and we need to appreciate how far we've come, because our air quality is better than it ever has been. Our air quality gets better every single year. Even though our population goes up, our air quality gets better. And a lot of it is because of some of these innovations, particularly the Tier 3 fuels that was put in years ago. And it's taken years to develop that. Refineries now starting, just in the last year, have started to sell that to gas, gas stations. You can now buy it in certain areas in the state, and those cleaner cars and cleaner fuels are really going to help us over the next 10 years to improve our air quality. The next phase of improving our air quality is reducing emissions from our homes, in gas, in lawnmowers, and other, wood burning stoves and things like that. Question.
Will you personally support the intent of voters in relation to Proposition 4 and the Independent Redistricting Commission?
So the Redistricting Commission is in force. The Redistricting Commission, that's going to be an issue that we're going to see over the next year or so, and hopefully everyone's filled out the census. The deadline is upon us now to fill out your census. We'll get that census data back, and then next year start planning for redistricting in 2021 and ahead of the 2022 elections. So what's going to happen is that the Redistricting Commission is going to basically put together some maps. They're going to present them to the legislature, and the legislature is not required to use those maps. And so it will be interesting to see, what the Redistricting Commission comes up with in terms of their maps, and what ends up happening with what the legislature adopts. So I can't say that the legislature will adopt the exact map that the Redistricting Commission presents, but it certainly will be one of those maps that's presented. And if you look back at the redistricting process from 10 years ago, I think that it's going to follow a very similar process, because if you remember 10 years ago, anybody from the public could go into an online tool and create their own redistricting map. They could draw the boundaries however they wanted. And the tricky part in doing that is that every district has to be equal in population. It can only deviate by just a tiny amount. And so changing boundaries on one district has a domino effect to other districts. And so it actually becomes very tricky to draw those districts. And what we saw was there wasn't a lot of, when you look at state legislator districts, there wasn't a lot of carve outs based on political leanings of one community or another. the main debate was over what to do with the congressional districts, particularly the 4th congressional district. So we'll see what happens and how those boundaries change. I think that we are expecting that Utah County will pick up a lot more population than what it did, than what it had last 10 years ago. And so the population center is going to shift south, closer toward Utah County. I don't know what that means for the south end of the Salt Lake Valley. We've certainly seen some growth in Draper, but not as much as we've seen on the west side of Salt Lake Valley, and certainly not as much as what we've seen in Utah County. So it'll be interesting to see where how that has to shift to accommodate those population changes. Okay. Yes, redistricting, and in fact, I'm on one of the House committees that could very well, unless committee assignments change, I'm on a committee that could very well consider that. And then I've actually been as a part of one of the legislators in the state of Utah that's part of a national redistricting committee with the National Conference of State Legislatures. So it's something that I've been watching closely, and it will be interesting to see how that plays forward. I'm not going to be the one in charge of it or managing the redistricting process, but certainly I will weigh in on that. Yes, another question.
Will there be high transparency into the process of redistricting, of the redistricting
Yeah,
committee?
that's a good question. High transparency. So I'll describe the transparency and what I know about what I expect the process to be, and then I'll let the voters decide if they feel like they consider that high transparency. But transparency, yes, because all of the maps, like I said, 10 years ago, the public could submit maps to the legislature. The Redistricting Commission will submit maps to the legislature. Different legislators may have different maps or different changes to certain maps that they want to make. All of those will be submitted to a committee that will hold public hearings. There will be public comment taken, and then all of those maps will be available to view by the public, and then it will be eventually a map has to be adopted by the legislature. That's something that is that cannot be changed. At the end of the day, the legislature votes on what redistricting map to adopt, and so all of the public hearings, all of the votes taken will all be public. And so I think, yes, it'll have a high level of transparency. The whole process from drawing the maps to considering them, the debates, the public comment, the votes taken, everything will be done in the light of day.
Nothing else for now.
All right, yeah, and that's a great topic to cover. I also want to talk about something that's maybe a little bit closer to home. I know that a lot of Draper residents are concerned about, and that's with some legislation that went on with regard to the Geneva Rock gravel extraction operation that we have in Draper. There was, this is something we talked about 2 years ago in the campaign that I had then in 2018, because and actually I'll go back even further than that during my time on the city council. Going back to about 2012, Geneva Rock had started to talk to the city of Draper about expanding their gravel pit operations. And I actually went out and met with them to get educated about what they wanted to do back then in 2012, along with Mayor Smith. And we met with them, we talked about it. I didn't know a lot about their operations out there, and I was able to learn a little bit about it. This was, long before that some of the current extractions that had happened on parts of the mountain. And at that time, we said, they were looking at maybe doing a rezone to expand their operations. At that time, there was no formal application that they made, but we basically told them that we weren't terribly interested in doing that. And so I think they put that plan on hold. They never submitted an application for it. They came back in 2015 informally with some plans. They talked to us about it. Again, we basically said we weren't interested in doing that. So in 2017, 2018, they started coming back with a formal application. They filed a formal application with the city of Draper to expand their operations there. And at that point, I had retired from the city council, and so I was no longer on the city council. But I know it was an issue that a lot of people were concerned about. And as I was running for election to this office in 2018, it was something that came up as well. And my position then was that I would 100% would support that as a local decision. I have no interest in the state coming in and undermining the local authority of a municipality to govern land use in their city. That's something that local governments do, and they control zoning in their jurisdiction. So I didn't think that, and I don't think that that's something that the state should come in and undermine that authority, even though that's an authority that the state has given to the cities. I think that the state needs to leave that authority with the local governments. So there was some legislation that was proposed in 2019 legislative session that would have taken away some of that authority from Draper City or from municipalities with regard to gravel extraction operations. And I vigorously opposed that legislation. And we were able to get that legislation changed. And one of the things that changed with it is that there was a moratorium put on that type of legislation, and there was no basically it was kind of a timeout to give the cities time to negotiate and come up with a plan for how to work with the gravel operations in their city. So it's been my hope that eventually that will work out, and that we have great local officials in the city of Draper, and they're working on this issue and working with Geneva Rock on what they want to do with their plans. Now, personally, my position hasn't changed on that. I still think that's a local decision, and I will support Draper City in the decision that they make, and do what I can here on Capitol Hill to protect their land use authority. Now, I think that if you consider, who you want to have your voice up here on Capitol Hill, I think that's something you need to think about. If this is an issue that you're concerned about, which of the candidates is best equipped to defend that position and make sure, and stand strong for that. And I think that my position in the legislature clearly gives me the strong position to defend Draper City and to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the citizens of Draper. Where we have in the Utah legislature a supermajority of the Republican Party, you definitely want someone that's part of that majority party to be the one defending your voice on a critical issue that affects our community and our district. So that would be my advice to consider that very carefully, as if you're particularly concerned about Geneva Rock being and who is best equipped to stand up for you on that issue. Okay, I will talk about. Is there a question? We have a question. Okay, the question is some good stuff. Okay,
There you go.
All right.
Oh, just kidding.
Sorry, I can't read it.
It's just a comment.
Oh, it's a comment. Okay. All right. Yeah. So, definitely, that's something that that I think I can say that 2 years ago I promised that I would where I was going to be on that issue, and now I can say that I did what I promised I was going to do, and so I will continue to stand strong and be a voice for the city of Draper on that particular issue as well. I'd also like to talk about another issue that's very, very important to us, if there's no other questions, with another issue that's very specific to Draper, and that's also the future of the prison property. There was a recent announcement. There's a website called thepointutah.org that starts to lay out the future of the prison property. And so there is a survey going out. The public can provide input. The new prison site is currently under construction, well under construction, west of the airport in Salt Lake City, and is slated to be opened, I think, in 2022, I believe, completing construction, just prior to that. So once those prison operations move from the current site at Point of the Mountain into the new site, then demolition can start happening, reconstruction can start happening, and redevelopment of that site. So right now, what's happening in preparation for that is the planning process is really starting in earnest. And the legislature created the Point of the Mountain Authority, which basically is the group that's going to guide that development and that planning process. That authority, that board is now in the process of hiring. They've hired a planner, and they've put out an RFP to contract with a planning firm that will come out and start planning that. And so that process will be shared, will be transparent. There'll be a lot of public comment. But the vision of that, I really like the direction that commission's going, and I am part of a stakeholder group that we meet monthly to talk about the direction of that. The stakeholder group that I'm a part of has other elected officials like Mayor Wilson from Salt Lake County and Mayor Ramsey from South Jordan. Our own Mayor Walker actually sits on the board itself. And we also have Tasha Lowry, who's on the Draper City Council, that's on that stakeholder board as well. But we provide input, Senator McKay, Senator Fillmore, others, and we provide input from what we're hearing from our constituents about the process, about the direction that it's going. And so, you can give direct input, you can give input to me, and I will pass it along to the board. You can give input to Mayor Walker as he sits on the board as well. But the goal of that land is to make sure that it's an economic engine for the state of Utah. It has tremendous economic potential in terms of a job creation site, as well as having a mixed use of residential and retail and other uses on that site. It's about 700 acres and, strategically located. It really is, we've talked a lot about this, about the tremendous potential that site has, given its location, given the transportation infrastructure. And one of the biggest concerns that is often brought up is transportation infrastructure and making sure that we have adequate transportation there. We currently have I-15, Mountain View Corridor and other Bangerter Highway, as well as transit with Front Runner and also the opportunity for tracks. And so there's a lot of transportation infrastructure there that it's going to be a really exciting, innovative project that gets developed there. Question?
It was a question that went back to the Geneva Rock.
Okay.
So sorry,
Sure.
We're going back a little bit.
Go back to Geneva.
Okay, there's okay. So do you have any specific plan to stop Geneva Rock from continuing to pressure Draper and their continuing efforts to subvert local control and local residents' wishes?
So, I can't stop Geneva from asking. I can't stop Geneva from, even putting pressure on or offering solutions. I think that at some point there needs to be a solution offered. There needs to be there needs to be a resolution there, and I'm confident and have trust in our local city council and mayor to work with Geneva Rock to come up with a good solution there. It's interesting because I just last Saturday, people who know me know that I like to mountain bike, and there are some new mountain bike trails that have recently opened up that connect. There's a system of trails that Lehigh has developed above Traverse Mountain that now connect to some of the trails in Draper. And so if you go up Ann's Trail, there's a new trail that goes up behind the ridge, the flat part of the ridge behind the hang gliding park, and there's a trail there, and it gives you a great perspective into the gravel pit, and because it goes along that boundary between some of that pristine open space that we want to preserve and the current gravel pit operations. And so, the last thing I would want to see is further encroachment of those gravel pit operations to take out some of those new trails that have been built and some of those other areas that are really nice up there. And so, that's my outlook, and I think that working with Draper City, I really think that they can come up with a solution there. I don't know how long that's going to take, and certainly making sure that they're following all the regulations that they need to follow is really important as well. But I don't think that the state should come in and bring the hammer down on Draper City and come up with a solution. I think that Draper City needs to do that. I hope that answers the question.
And then we've got another question going back to the old prison location. And the question is, will you work with the tech community to set up a hackerspace?
Oh, that's a good question. Being in the technology community myself, I think there's enough opportunities there on that prison site for lots of different uses, and certainly there will be office space, and we've got spaces, different parts in the valley. Like you look at the salt mine that's in Sandy, or that Church and State that's downtown on 4th South, which are kind of like incubator type environments, Silicon Slopes in Lehigh. I think those types of environments, I think we'll see a lot of those things come out of that prison site. And so, what specific things are built there, I don't know, but I think it will absolutely be a hub for the technology community. And so I could see that kind of activity going on there for sure. Absolutely.
Okay, nothing else for now.
All right. So we've talked about Geneva. We've talked about the prison property. We've talked a little bit about the state, what we're going through with COVID and education. When it comes to education, I feel like I've really had a good relationship. I want to talk a little bit about education in general. I feel like I have a really good relationship with our local school board, our Canyon School District, as well as the private schools. We have Juan Diego, fantastic private school that has been nationally recognized. We love having them in our community, as well as the charter schools that we have. So we really have a good, diverse education community. We have diverse opportunities for education in Draper. And this experience that we're going through with COVID has now, I think, broadened everyone's view in terms of what might be possible in terms of online learning options or homeschooling options. So I'm very optimistic that we may see some innovation come out of this situation that would really benefit our education community. And so I've really enjoyed working very closely with different educators, visiting classrooms, doing presentations, and seeing and hearing from teachers about the challenges that they see. One of the things that we identified was, that there was a real need for more aides, social workers, mental health professionals to take some of that burden off of our educators and give them more time in their day to focus on the learning experience of their students. And so those are some of the areas that we focused on in terms of funding that we did in the last couple of years. And I think that's very helpful as well. And similarly to that, I want to talk a little bit about law enforcement, because we've had some, obviously a lot going on this year in terms of concerns over police conduct, over riots happening. Even here in Salt Lake City, right here in downtown Salt Lake, we've seen we've seen some protests turn violent, and I really support and will always stand behind anyone who wants to stand up and voice their opinions and protest peacefully. But crossing the line into violence, vandalism, anything of that sort is completely unacceptable. And it really has raised the consciousness of the public in terms of law enforcement policies and practices. And I can say that during my time working with our local police department in Draper, I'm so grateful for the first responders that we have in Draper, and our police department is top notch. Years ago, before it was ever front page news, our police chief and our police department came up with proposals for policies and in terms of less than lethal methods that they would use. And we even years ago were shown demonstrations on some of the equipment, and we as a city council invested money in equipment like the traditional tasers, but also beanbag shotguns and different restraining devices that were less harmful, protected the officers, but also didn't cause harm to potential suspects who needed to be restrained. And not only did we provide that equipment to our police officers, but they went through specific training, and we had policies on how to use it and when to use it. And Draper was one of the very early adopters in the use of body cameras. And one of the policies that was put in place is having policies that required that body camera to be on at all times. Every interaction that an officer had with a member of the public had to be on videotape, and then it could not be tampered with by the officer afterward. And that was something that protected both the public as well as the officers themselves and the city, that we could show that in that interaction, if there was any accusation of any misconduct, we could go back to the video, and more often than not, it refuted what was any accusations that were being made against the officers. And so the officers, I think, really appreciated that it showed that they were following the proper procedures and proper conduct in those interactions. And so I think that's something that Draper City's been doing for many years, and I think that some other police departments should be following those same kind of policies as well. Question?
So this person's a big fan of funding for mental health research and resources, especially considering the state's high suicide rate. Please speak to this and what impact you hope to have.
Yes, absolutely. I really appreciate that question. And honestly, I have to give a lot of credit to one of my good friends, Representative Steve Elison, who represents Sandy Cottonwood Heights area. He has really been a champion and a leader in that area. And he has pushed through legislation that I have wholeheartedly supported, voted for, and even put my name down as a co-sponsor on some of that legislation to put more resources toward mental health services and really try and address the high suicide rate that we have in Utah. Suicide is something that has touched a lot of families in the state of Utah, and it's a very, very difficult topic and a sensitive subject. And I'm glad that we're now as a society becoming more open in how to address some of these needs and how to remove some of the stigma. Just recently, as a result of some of this legislation, state and national hotlines have been put in place for help. We have the Safe UT app that allows people that are in crisis, or students that are in crisis, to report those kinds of things. And the resources that we have available are much better, particularly when it comes to, and I want to talk about, I was just talking about law enforcement, how the mental health services ties in with law enforcement, because that is one of the problems that we see. The tragedy that we just recently saw, where a young autistic boy was shot by police officers right here in Utah, was absolutely heart-wrenching, and really raises the question, well, why would we have, or why is it that we tend to default to law enforcement officers constantly having to deal with people that are in mental health crises? And sometimes that is the case. Sometimes you need, an officer to be there if it's a safety situation, but there needs to be alternatives to, especially to incarceration for someone who's in a mental health crisis. So one of the bills and one of the pieces of legislation that has been done here in the state of Utah, just in the last couple of years since I've been in, is to put more resources into to create a mental health detention area where someone who is out of control, who is potentially violent toward, a danger to themselves or someone else, a place where they can be taken, that they can get services when they're in that crisis, that's not jail, without having to book them into jail and charge them with a crime, but rather have a place where they can be taken and resources that can be brought to bear to help them with their mental health crisis. And it might be an addiction issue, but it's, having a mental health crisis, having an addiction, or just plain being homeless is not a crime and shouldn't necessarily be treated as a crime. Police officers oftentimes are encountered with those kind of situations, but they need to have the proper training and have the proper policies in place, as well as the resources given that they can direct those individuals to the places that they can get the services that they need to address that. So absolutely, I have supported those efforts by the legislature, and I will continue to do so. And we need to continue moving in that direction. But we really have made some tremendous strides in the resources and the funding and everything that we're providing, as well as and we're starting to see our suicide rates level off. The fight is far from over, but the trend is at least going in the right direction, that we're seeing those rates of suicide level off, and hopefully we can start seeing those things that go down over the years. I'll also talk about another piece of legislation that I ran, and where one of the issues that I'm very aware of, because it's something I deal with in my own family, is I'm aware of the challenges of young children who are born having been exposed to alcohol, during their mother's pregnancy. And so I ran some legislation last year that would focus funding on creating better awareness over the dangers of drinking alcohol during pregnancy. A baby that's born having been exposed to alcohol before birth, because the mother was drinking, that child will have lifelong impacts to their mental health. Children with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders are 80%. 80% of the children born with that have social issues, end up in jail, end up addicted to drugs, and with substance abuse issues. It's a serious mental and social problem that we deal with, that we will deal with for the rest of that person's life. And so by putting just a few resources, a small amount of funding to perhaps preventing that from happening in the first place by educating people about the dangers of drinking alcohol during pregnancy. If we can reduce that from happening, it actually pays off dividends, not just in reduced costs to the state in social services, but the impact to people's lives is tremendous, both to the children and to their families that deal with the social outcomes from someone who has fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. And so that's an issue that I'm going to continue to push on. The state of Utah is an alcohol control state, and we do that for a reason, because of some of the social impacts of alcohol. One of the things that we do is we take a portion of alcohol revenue that the state normally would receive. We take a portion of that and we spend it on educating young people about the dangers of drinking alcohol for youth. And so my program is very similar to that, and is tailored and copied that model to funnel some of those alcohol funds to remediate the negative impacts of alcohol in the case of drinking during pregnancy. So that's an issue that I was able to pass a bill last year to start that process and to start doing a pilot project. And I will continue working on that issue because I think it's something that can be very helpful for the state. No more questions? Okay. We've gone a little bit more than an hour. What's that? No more questions? Okay. Well, so I think that I'll wrap it up right there. Again, I really appreciate everyone that's taken the time to watch this video live, or maybe you're watching it recorded. Utah really is a tremendous state. We're incredibly lucky to live where we live and to have the strong economy, the diverse economy that we have. One of the best things that I love about our economy is we're ranked highly on so many different types of metrics, is we're one of the top states in the nation for upward mobility. People here have more opportunity than other areas in the country to improve their economic standing and to really, grow and thrive economically and in their families in this state. It really is, I think, the best place to live and work and to raise a family. The opportunities we have here with the outdoors and with the environment that we have are really tremendous. So I think that we need to continue with the principles and practical solutions to keep that, keep Utah, keep us moving in that direction, keep us as one of the best places to live and work and to raise our families. And so, again, I appreciate your spending some time with me. If you ever have any questions, you can email me. You can call me. I have people call me on the phone all the time, text, social media. By all means, get a hold of me and I will respond as soon as I can. So thank you very much and have a good evening.
And we're done.